350 miles. What the start time? They started you when?
3 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah, Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just get a little half day at work. We're just gonna go get on my bike and ride 350 miles.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Coaches on Couches.
Bing slouches.
Today on the couch, we've got David Axe,
The X-Man.
finisher of the Unbound XL.
In top 25.
Top 25
Coming in
finisher.
at 15th.
That's actually, why don't we just say top 20?
Right?
Say top 15.
That sounds better. Yeah.
Top 15.
Top 15.
Top 15
Top
finisher.
15. Which was over top 10. He was like top 10%.
That's
More so.
yeah. I'm sure there was we'll get into it.
Yeah.
All right. But before we get too far into this, I'm Coach Dale Sanford.
I am Coach Bryant Funston. We are the co-founders of BPC Performance Coaching, where we specialize in helping time-crunched athletes optimize their busy schedules so they can maximize their athletic performance. You can find out more about BPC by going to buildpeakcompete.com, checking out Facebook and YouTube at Build Peak Compete, and or all up on that Instagram at BPC Performance, not
We
at
just
Build
like to
Peak
switch.
Compete.
We like to switch it up on you. Mm-hmm. Keep you guessing. All right. So first and foremost, David, it's probably a long time coming to be on the podcast. Tell everybody what the XL is. Everybody kind of knows Unbound. Or if you're listening to this, you probably know what Unbound is. You know, Unbound is like the Super Bowl of gravel in the United States, at least, and started out as a 200-mile gravel race. They added the 100 and a 50, and they might even have, 25 as well. But then for some insane people, they decided, hey, 200 is not enough.
Way too easy.
That's a joke.
That's still done in one day.
Yeah, 200 in a day is not enough. So explain the XL.
Yeah. I think the XL started back in like 2018, I think it was. So it's been around for 5-6 years, something like that. And yeah, it was something that, you know, the Unbound itself had been around for a while, was a premier race, and they added that in for the crazy people that figured there wasn't enough. As I think ultra races have become a little more popular. There's some other bigger events that have them. Even Rule of 3 just added an overnight 200-mile ride with all the single track. Yeah, I don't think I ever want to do that one.
Never, David.
Barely get through 100 of that. But yeah, so they added that in, and it started with, I want to say it started like 20 people or something that did it. And it has grown. The past couple years were 100 people. And then this year, the registration ballooned to like 200. At the end of the day, it was like 204 or something that they had registered. And then on the start line, I think they ended up with like over 170, something like that actually started the race. And this was the first year that they also started the XL on the main start finish line. So like, even more official than before. There was a helicopter going around filming it. Like, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, the ultra distance events have become just as premier as the main event. And Unbound being, starting as a 200 in general has always been longer than most of the other gravel races in general, which was the big allure to, finish before the sun goes down.
And the difference in this XL as well is it's self-supported.
Yeah. So yeah, unlike the other races, all you can use is gas stations. I can't have anybody out there giving support, helping me fix a flat or anything like that. It is fully self-supported, which is another challenge to it as well.
Yeah, it goes mega into equipment choices, which we'll get into. So it's 350 miles. Well, the start time, they started you when?
3 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah, Friday afternoon.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just get a little half day at work. We're just gonna go get on my bike and ride 350 miles.
We'll do 6 hours before sundown and then ride through the night.
Absolutely. So, David, before we get into the intricacies of training, preparing for this beast, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you got into cycling in general.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like I was an athlete growing up. I did ride a bike from time to time, and enjoyed it, but never was consistent at it. As I got out of high school into college, I kind of got into running just as a way to stay fit. And that's really all I used it for, was just to stay in shape. And then when I moved to Richmond, Virginia, is when I had hurt my Achilles somehow running. And that's when I bought my first hybrid bike to find a non-impact sport, and fell in love with that. But that was about it. It was 40 miles a couple times a week that I'd ride by myself, never in a group ride. And then, when I moved to Memphis, is when I got connected with some people through church in the cycling community. And my friend Luke Cooper let me borrow his road bike, which I'd wanted to try at some point, or buy my own road bike, but just never had taken the dive. And that's when I fell in love with it. I loved it. I got on my first group ride. I had never done more than 50 miles, which I thought was a crazy amount of miles at the time.
Oh, yes.
I couldn't, 50 miles for me was a massive accomplishment when I rode it back in Richmond. When I did that ride. And that first group ride I did was with Ride to Rosemary on a Saturday out to Moscow, and I did 80 miles and was able to stay with the group, and I loved it, and quickly got into it after that. Got my first gravel bike within a couple of months, started doing the gravel races.
Bought all the spandex.
Yeah, all the spandex. Ended up joining 901 Racing that year, and have just fallen in love with it. It's a great outlet for me to stay healthy. It's a great outlet for my mental health. It works well with my work schedule to find times to ride. And yeah, it's just been an awesome opportunity to not only just stay healthy, but be a part of a community that really cares about each other, which is part of the reason I was able to do this race. So,
for sure. Tell everybody, kind of give everybody an example. So, you're not a professional athlete. You don't have unlimited hours in the day, even though you do oftentimes maybe lose some sleep to get up and ride. But yeah. Tell everybody what you do.
I work for the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm their director of events. So my team handles all of the concerts and games, all the events that go through FedEx Forum. So I've been doing that since I moved to Memphis, and it's a really fun job, fun environment to work in.
Which kind of plays into, if you need tickets, at David Act, 97, I think. Which kind of goes into when we were talking about the start time for this race, 3:00. Yeah, you got the energy those first 6 hours or so of the race starting and everything, and then when we were chatting, we were kind of excited about a big chunk of the day was going to be those dark hours, because David, with his job, he's got a lot of late hours that he does. He was already riding a ton. You'd see he's one of the few that will ride in the morning and it will say evening ride, because he's leaving at 3 a.m. So he's doing this before he even started training for this in earnest. So it was a good setup, we felt like, for him to tackle, for sure.
Yeah.
So this, this is not your first foray into ultra distance.
Yeah.
For the most part, right?
Yeah. I like I said, I've done some weird hours. I like big rides. It's a way for me to just mentally kind of zone out and clear my head with all the stresses of work and life. And I do love just riding my bike. I love getting out there, whether it be with a group or doing a long ride by myself, just listening to a podcast. So that wasn't something that was necessarily new to me. I try to do a double century, 200 miles every year. I've done as long as 250 a couple years ago. That's always been usually half by myself, half with a group ride, but I've done big long rides. I did Gravel Worlds, the 150 for that. So that was the biggest race I've done. And then, I've just put in some very long days with the way that my work schedule works out. I like to sometimes get up super early and just be able to ride by myself for a bit, and then join something like Peddler or stuff like that. So I'm used to the early hours because of my job schedule sometimes being where I have to work from 3 a.m. until 3 a.m. the next day for a concert. My body is used to, as long as I'm moving and going, being able to respond because I have to be able to get up at 3, get in the building at 4, and be ready to go. And so that's something that thankfully I know not everybody can do, but my body's been able to respond to that to this point at my age. So it suited well for what I was looking to do with this race.
Yeah, that's good. That's good insight. I mean, your job seems to really have lended well to the demands of something like this.
Yeah.
So with that, let's get into the preparation, because this is not like a thing where you can really just go ride miles. I mean, that's a big part of it, but you can't just go put in several long rides, go do 100 and call it good.
Yeah.
And not to mention, and we'll get into the course for this year, but not to mention you're looking at, what was the time goal?
My goal was sub 24 hours.
So a full day's worth of riding with minimal breaks.
Yeah.
So what was Brian, what was the main?
Get him to eat. Get him to eat and drink was goal number 1.
Yeah.
I do know that in the past, there's maybe been some nutritional and hydration.
He's like a camel. He's like a camel in general. Like, hey, Brian, like one of the first fueling conversations we had, not in preparation for this, but just on a ride, was like, hey, I'm doing like 100-mile ride and drinking like half a bottle. Is that a problem? Like, what?
Yes.
Dead on the side of the road if I tried to do that. So number 1 goal was, he does well and has performed well not doing a bunch of fueling, but it's a little bit different beast, a 5-6 hour versus 24 hours.
Yeah.
So step 1 was let's start working that in. And then ultimately with when he and I first chatted about it, it was, I wanted to, he was going to be easy because he already liked to do the long stuff. It's not like a person that may be listening to this and is like, whoa, wow, that sounds awesome. But I hate riding my bike more than 3 hours. So can I get by doing, maybe 1 or 2 6-hour rides?
No. The answer is no.
Exactly. No. So with David, I already knew he liked to ride his bike a lot. So I wasn't as concerned about him having to balance it quite as much as someone who didn't like to do that. Now it's still an issue because he did have to work some crazy hours, and we actually used that to our benefit a little bit. And the thing I wanted to do is I would much rather someone did not get the really massive, 1-day ride. And we actually, chatted some about it. Like psychologically, do you need a super long one? And he had done 250 miles before. He's done 200 milers before. So confidence wise, we knew we didn't have to do that super long, 14-hour day to mentally give confidence. So what we decided to do was go more with stacking volume throughout the week, still having some big rides. And for those, he was typically going out super early and then finishing with a group, which can be, mentally beneficial, but we also knew it was going to give him some efforts late. And then I wanted to make sure we gave lots of time after his last, big week. I gave him a little more time than I normally would for someone doing a smaller event, just to make sure we had cleared as much fatigue as we could. So we went from having some 3-week stacks of volume with unloads. And I think the first time he was, entering week 3, he's like, man, I'm still, I'm feeling good. He's still pushing good numbers and everything. And by the end of that 3rd week, he was like, I didn't think I was going to want that light week, but I'm really looking forward to this lighter week. And then as we got near the end, so we gradually stacked the volume, made sure we had these light weeks for him. And then the last big block we had was a 2-week block rather than a 3-week block. And we essentially had, those 2 weeks, the TSS for the week ended up being at or just above what the TSS for the race was, which was volume wise. We weren't going exactly off TSS, but looking back, that's kind of what it ended up being. But we tried to get the week volume to match pretty close to what the race volume was going to be.
So the big takeaway there is the value of training stress stacking or volume stacking. Like we use this all the time in not only cycling, but ultra running and stuff like that. I mean, look, most people don't have, 8 to 12 hours a day, even on a Saturday, to go out and do a long ride or a long run. So if you can, if your goal is to kind of get 12 hours, stack it, 8 and 4 or 6 and 6 in a couple of days, and you would be surprised at how like the 11th hour on the second day feels as fatiguing as it would have been if you did it all in one day.
Yeah.
Like you let that acute fatigue settle in a little bit overnight, and you're in the same realm.
Mm-hmm. And that was about what we used from like a normalized power standpoint. We looked at because we capped that second big week, which was the final, that final big block. And we looked at that. I mean, he did 180 miles that day. So it's not like he did a little ride, and he did it after working through the night and starting at like 1 a.m. So it was a concert, right?
I had a concert that Friday that I had to be up by like 5 a.m. for. So worked that whole concert day, which that is not easy. You're walking around all day. So that was some of the difficulty of training with some of these rides I was going into. Even with sleeping for a little bit of time, I was coming off of a concert where my legs were super tired just from running around for 14 hours around a building, doing the things for a concert. But this time, we went from working that concert all day, literally the concert got done, loadout had started, and I handed off the keys basically to my coworker and got home, put stuff on my bike, and got right on my bike and started riding with the intention of, getting that experience of riding through the night, but also on the fatigue to kind of feel what it's going to be like, having fatigue coming into that. Yep. And then riding a super long ride, which I think was super valuable, not only from the perspective of being honestly almost more tired than I was for the actual race at that point of the race, but also being able to test my equipment at that time as well. That was a key opportunity for me to test some of my lights, which I did have an issue with the light, not working the way I thought it was going to, that I don't know if I would have experienced that otherwise. So that was a super great opportunity to test that stuff. Then going into what was a group ride that morning, Trinity, where I could add like a really hard ride onto the end of that. For
by the way, if for those of you who are not from the Memphis area, Trinity is like our Saturday Hammerfest, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's more or less two plus big hot spots that are race simulation, and I mean the hitters come out.
Yeah. So his norm power for that ride was almost dead on with what he did for the race.
Yeah.
So when we were looking at like what do we think you're probably going to be about, that's sort of the ride we were looking at as our barometer.
Yep.
So it's like, hey, if you go out and you're 7 hours in and you're seeing 30% above this, there's going to be a fall off, because we know that's about where your body's probably going to be.
Yep.
And sure enough, by the end of the race, it was almost dead on.
So real quick, what was the biggest single day, and what was the biggest single week volume of training?
I think that single day was that 185, stacked on top of that, not sleeping into the concert. So that
was the time on that?
It's around 9.
Yeah, 9 hours, 10 hours, something like that. Because I finished with Trinity that morning, so we finished around 11:30. So I was riding with a couple of breaks throughout that time, but riding from basically 1 a.m. until that point. And then I think our biggest week was that week or a week after. The 2 weeks were like 24 and 25 hours, something like that. I ended up doing 400, 500 miles. Those 2 weeks were the last 2 big weeks before we kind of started to taper down a bit.
Yeah, so you're essentially trying to put in the amount of time that you plan to do the race in an entire week.
Yeah.
Over multiple weeks.
Yeah, and then we stacked
weeks
it twice.
straight. Yeah, and that is how we're going to simulate that one day. Mm-hmm. Accumulate fatigue over 2 big weeks. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the best ways to simulate these ultra races, where you're just never you cannot physically go out and be like, I got a 350 this weekend, I'm going to go ride 350. Yeah. It's just,
and it's the risk reward. The reward you get from that would be pretty much just psychological, but even that could be negative, right?
Yeah,
You go out and you're like, man, that was horrible. Like, or you go and get close to that, you're still putting so much fatigue into the body that you risk a lot of stuff. You risk injury, you risk overtraining, you risk the mental fatigue. There's a lot of risks, but spreading it out, especially with someone who likes to ride his bike a lot.
Yeah. And I would say too, for those that see these big distances, don't feel like you need to ride that 350 for your body to be able to ride 350, especially on the bike. For me personally, I think once you can ride about 150 miles, your body starts to go into a zone where it can maintain more miles after that for the most part. I think if you're doing it, try to get a bigger ride in is helpful, like we did. But yeah, it's not like by going to 300 miles, I was like, okay, now I can do 350. Yeah. Like once you know you can do a long ride and you can sustain that, your body can handle, like I said, about, I would say 150 plus around that time frame with little stops, with few stops. From there, it's, can your body maintain that fatigue? And that's where I think a lot of us don't experience that, because we'll do a ride and then we'll have a day off, and then we'll do a ride and then have a day off. So that opportunity to stack those days on days on days, or go super hard on a Saturday and then add in a 3-hour ride on a Sunday that you don't normally do. That's when you start to experience, what can my body handle as far as maintaining that with fatigue in my legs, was super, super important for the training.
And there was a decent amount of times where the comments were like, I did not think today was going to go well, but legs responded. I could hold this power for the whole ride. That
was what was really exciting about the training was, because I got a little bit frustrated at times where I was doing like the Buffalo crits or, Saturday hot spots where like my legs were not responding to that because that wasn't the training I was doing. So mentally that was hard sometimes. I feel like I'm putting all this work in, but I'm not seeing those results, even though
super high end.
Correct. Yeah. Even though I knew that wasn't what we were going for, and I knew I could outlast anybody for, 10 hours on a bike. Like that's different, but mentally that was hard. But there was those days where I would go into a Sunday where I didn't really want to ride because I was tired, and I was like, this is going to be miserable. And then all of a sudden I'd be able to hold a power that was way higher than I thought, and my body responded. And I got so excited on the bike. I was like, holy cow, this is why I'm training. This is awesome. This is fun. This is going to pay off. And so those were the things that kept me going of okay, I may not be seeing it here, again, which is not what I'm training for, even though I like to see these things because that's what I also am doing that. But I'm seeing the results pay off here. And I'm hoping that's going to translate to the race. You know?
Yeah. The big takeaway is you are what you train.
Yeah.
I mean, we see a ton of people that are like, oh, well, I ride, I'm putting in 200 miles a week and then I'm still getting dropped from these hard rides. I'm like, well, are you doing any hard efforts other than the hard ride? Yeah. If no, add those in, because you are not going to adapt to that type of demand unless you're doing it outside of when you need it.
Yep.
So with that, what were there any specific style workouts or efforts that you guys were focusing on other than just stacking miles on miles?
We did a decent chunk of pairing fatigue early with the higher intensity stuff late.
Yep. So,
he'd go out and knock out 2 hours and then join a group ride. And finish with some of the upper end intensity, which also helps from a mental standpoint. He's, he likes riding solo, but he also is a social cyclist. So one thing that, and Dale, this well, it's very easy when people are doing huge volume to get burnout if most of that is alone. And if it's too structured, if it's too much, hit these exact efforts. So we were doing that, and then on harder days, we were saying, okay, you're gonna mix these efforts into the ride. Yep. We did some VO2 max stuff early on, where he was going out and working some of those VO2 max efforts into the ride, and then hitting extra after the ride. And then as we got to a point where it's all right, now we just got to get the volume. We were letting him get his intensity through the group stuff, but trying to strip out more of the structured intensity and not burning too much on the intensity and the volume. So we almost got essentially more specific to the race, right? A 24-hour event. We're going to try not to be burning a lot of VO2 style efforts.
Yeah.
Although when we dive into the race here in a second, he did go out pretty hard. He did go out pretty hard in this one.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to I don't want to skip over the nutrition part, and that's part of the race, but you made a point to say that it was one of the biggest things you had to deal with. So was the adjustments in nutrition more, we just need to eat more and drink more, or was it like gut training where you're like your stomach, you just really you're full, or I don't feel like eating, or what was the big switch we had to flip there?
I think, I mean, I'll put a disclaimer that the way that my body reacts to nutrition and hydration is not normal by any means, and I get made fun of for it, rightly so. So that being said, I mean, generally when I ride, I just drink water. Like I don't have food on me.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't use scratch in my bottles, anything like that. And I've never really had a problem with that. So, but when I do race, I do bring some gels with me. Like I know I need to be fueling in some way. Now do I ever necessarily feel the effect of it? No, but like I know I need to. So like when I've done big races, I brought Uncrustables, gels. I've at least brought some food with me. And I knew for this race, you know, with burning the amount of calories I had to do even more, you know, even if that's not what ultimately, you know, any pro person or any coach would say I need to do. At least I need to do more, as much as I can, like push myself. And so I started incorporating, you know, doing rides with scratch, even though again I felt no benefit from it, you know, but like I started adding that to my bottles for rides, and eating some gels every once in a while just to incorporate into normal riding. And
on your last long ride, I think would you say you had like 6 Uncrustables before the ride?
Yeah.
Before like the group ride started. So you just smashing Uncrustables through the night.
Yeah, that 185 ride, that was where I tested that. And I said, okay, even though mentally I don't feel the need for it, I'm going to eat 1 Uncrustable every hour. Like I'm going to force myself to do that. I'm going to put scratch in my bottles, and like I'm going to force my body to consume that. And that was honestly a challenge for me, like because that's not something I normally do. But I knew that like this race could have a big impact. Like if I get to if I'm riding as hard as I am, who knows what the temperature is going to be? I have to make sure my body has fuel in it. Because like in this, like I'm going longer than I ever have before. And so like, while my body may have been able to avoid it to that point, with shorter rides where at the end of the day I'm home and then I can eat, because like when I'm done riding I usually eat a lot. Like I eat after the ride, I drink a lot of water after the ride, stuff like that. But I knew I had to be a focus, and so that was something going into training. That was something, you know, Funston and I talked about and really emphasized, of not only gut training, making sure that, you know, all of a sudden I wasn't filling my body with gels and stuff that it could not handle because I wasn't used to it. So making sure I was used to those different types of things I was, you know, adding into my bottles and my diet. But yeah, just the focus on that.
So did you ever think about bringing in Joey Chestnut for some?
Yeah, we were getting. I was like, eat a Big Mac, eat whatever. If you've never seen Joey Chestnut eat 34 Big Macs, that's a good YouTube video to watch. So as a reference here, some stats from the ride. 15,454 kilojoules when we start talking about energy.
Repeat that again.
15,454 over the ride duration, actual moving time, 23 hours, 24 minutes, 27 seconds, 355 miles. 1,022 on the TSS number there for you training stress score folks. So obviously nearly 20,000 feet of elevation gain, 19,236.
So 15,000 calories plus burned. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a monster amount. I think the thing that people miss about the nutrition part is that you don't necessarily feel the benefits of what you're putting in until you need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it's too late.
Yep.
When you start to feel the decline, and for some people, it's like a light switch. You bonk and it's bam, you're done. And then for other people, it's like a slow decline and then you're done. And, you know, if you're not putting it back in, you are going to have performance decline. There's no way, shape, or form about it. If you're going over 3 or 4 hours, 2 hours really, if you're going over 2 hours, you need something for most people, depending on how hard you're going, but you need something coming in. Mm-hmm. And when you're burning 15,000 calories
That's a big day.
in 24 hours, like that's a monster day.
One of the challenges, though, like, Dale and I both eat and drink a lot on the bike and during training and races. But in the wintertime, don't need nearly as much. So the Trinity ride that was referenced earlier, I can do that just fine on 2 bottles in the wintertime.
Yeah.
In fact, I can be done with a 100-mile ride on 2 bottles if the temps are low.
Yep.
And we actually had a very unseasonably cool lead into this, which was actually a pretty big concern of mine. I didn't mention this to David, but it was like, if we get hit with a super hot day and it's been so cool, like, not only the things you have been eating, they may not work on the super hot day that was working on the cool days, but also just, it's very tough to stuff a lot down when it's not hot. And a lot of his miles were coming earlier in the day, pre-sunlight hours. So he forced it as much as he could. If a different person, doing 1 Uncrustable per hour would not be enough, most likely. But, for him, he was going from doing pretty much nothing for a 100-mile ride to, that's a massive increase for Mr. Axe over here. But like some stats I'd like to dive into real quick, if we could, as we transition to the actual race. Like I said, it started pretty hard. He went out and had his third best 10-minute of the previous 90 days near the very start of this race. He had a 20-minute that was norm power was pretty much at threshold early on in the race, and his 60-minute was right at that like zone 3-4 norm power line. So probably a good transition into like, how did the race start out? We talked about it possibly starting really fast.
I would just say, like, or before we get too far into the race, like, knowing that, like, in retrospect, knowing how hard the race ended up starting, because it is a race after all. And it's gotten so big now that there's a lot of heavy hitters that are in it.
Yes.
Is there anything that you guys would have changed in the training to prepare for a hard start or something like that?
I don't think so. I think the training was pretty much spot on, because I went into it knowing that, or being pretty confident that I wasn't going to get first. Like, this is an insane ride. And
what are you doing, Brian? You couldn't build some confidence in this dude?
I mean, he was only doing 1 Uncrustable per hour, Dale.
Yeah. But with this race becoming more popular and the 200 becoming even more popular, there have been pros that, because pros are actually doing, like, literally the gravel world champion did Unbound 200. Those guys are moving to the 350 for an opportunity to win that. That is what is happening. And I had done a lot of research on this race and the guys that had won it previously, and knew pretty confidently that, like, it would have to be a miracle for me to get first. Like, a lot of stuff would have to work. Not that I couldn't, like, I wasn't going to train as hard as I could, and that wasn't a goal. But, like, so because of that, I went into it with the goal of push yourself as hard as you can, but don't do something that's going to impact you at mile 20, because I knew my competitive advantage was riding through the night and be able to hold power when other people could no longer do that. And so there was times where, as frustrating as it was, I decided I'm going to let this group roll away. Like, and I was in the top 20 at that point, so I knew I was still in a good position. Like, I was happy with where I was. Like, my goal is top 20. That was before it was a 200 person race. But even though, I still was hoping for top 20, and I was going to be happy if I snuck into that top 20. And so when I knew I was in that position, there was times where I let groups roll away, because I felt I'm doing about 90% of what I think, like I would be in like a gravel cup or whatever, which is 50 miles for reference. And I was like, if I go to 100, I could potentially hurt myself. I could do something stupid that's going to impact me for hour 20. And I'm fine with that. Like, if those guys are strong enough that they can ride for 24 hours at that pace, good for them. Like, they're stronger than I am. But what was cool was, come 2 a.m, I started picking those guys off. And that was when I did my research for this race, which I did a lot going into it. When I watched videos, I watched Vegan Cyclist in the 2 that he had did. And that's where I saw him starting to pick people off in the middle of the night. And that's where I was like, with my ability to stay awake, stay at the same alertness level that I would from the start of the race to 3 in the morning, that's where I'll get guys. And that's where I did. I picked off probably 5 to 7 guys in the middle of the night that they were shot. Like they could not keep going at the pace that they were. And I gave them an opportunity to ride with me. Like they wanted like to finally get back to riding with someone. And they couldn't do it. And that gave me a boost of energy of like, my plan's working. Like, and so, yeah, that's kind of how it played out a little bit.
And even in the training leading up to it, he was still doing races. So I knew intensity wise and putting out good numbers in these races and having good results. So I knew intensity wasn't going to be a problem. And the chat we had a few days before when he was driving out was, you're going to know if you're going too deep.
Yep.
And if so, let him go. Like you're going to have a feeling like I'm in the red a lot right now.
Yep.
I probably need to, level back a little bit. But at the same token, it's like if you're feeling good and you're getting recovery and you're with a group that's giving you a good advantage,
Yep.
like you said, it is a race. So it was that balance. And it was like, we're not going to really know till the day of.
Yeah.
But use your smarts and know that it is, this is a 350-mile race. And his advantage definitely is he can peg it in zone 3 and stay there for long periods of time. Like he was showing in training, he could hold good, steady power for long periods of time and have race intensity efforts mixed in there. So I was pretty confident with him going into it.
So it started out guns blazing, and then you decided to let people kind of roll on, and then started picking people off during the night.
Yeah.
Where what was the hardest part of the course in your mind? And did you have any like major mechanical things or anything like that you had to deal with?
Yeah. So actually, I mean, I would say probably about 45 minutes in is when it really started to pick up. That's when they started to increase the pace. And then probably about an hour and a half in was when we hit the first like technical section. And that's when they drilled, like that's when the front group drilled it. It was like a Jeep 2-track section. And that's where they were trying to distance themselves. I had gotten into a crash an hour in. A guy clipped wheels in front of me, slid out, and it caused me to slide out because I couldn't avoid it. I crushed my knee. My bike dropped the chain. I'm seeing like everybody ride away. And through that whole process, all of a sudden my left shifter stopped working. I was worried at that point my race was done. Through a miracle, I was able to, I had the blip shifter, which ended up working. And then my shifter 45 minutes randomly started working again out of the blue. And then what's crazy is a small little offshoot is it broke for an hour, worked for 23 hours, and then we brought it back to the shop, and Lighting Speed Shop worked on fixing it. It would not work again. So, a God thing there that like something that could have ended my race. Just during that time worked. So that's crazy, but that's where I had to put the hardest 10-minute effort in, was bridging back up to that front group, because I knew like another advantage was it's all about the start of the race is all about distancing yourself. If you can distance yourself from people behind you, the likelihood of them bridging back up to you in a race like that is not high. So I knew that for me to do well, I needed to stay with that front group as long as possible without burning myself out. So yeah, that race started super, super hot. And then about 2 hours in, the groups had kind of split up in probably groups of like 5-10 people at a time. As far as that top 30 went, the front guys were off. And that's when I started settling into some people. And then I think it was we ran into some mud about 3 hours in that we could pedal through, but I ended up getting rocks stuck between my frame and my tire, so I had to hop off and actually clean that out. And those 4 guys that I'd been riding with rode away, and that's pretty much from there where I rode solo after that. So that was, as far as race intensity, that was the hardest stretch of the race. Like, people were racing like you would gravel cup or whatever, like a gravel race, like a shorter gravel race. It felt pretty similar to that. And then I started riding solo, and that's when I, settled into that zone 3-ish power, and just, pushed myself and tried to get into a zone. As far as the hardest part of the race, I would say mentally, not as much physically, but mentally, we ran into 2.5 miles of mud that I had to hike my bike through at mile like 225, somewhere in there. This was, the sun hadn't broken through the clouds yet, but it was at least getting light out. And that was mentally frustrating because I was in a good position, and then I hit that mud. You could not ride through it, like, at all. It locked up your wheels. So I'm having to walk through the grass. At one point I was trying to ride through the grass, and I flipped up over my bike because I hit a gully that I didn't see.
Insult to injury.
Yeah. And then on top of that, 5 guys came in behind me that I was in front of and caught up with me. So, like, mentally, I'm like, I had these positions, and now these guys are all catching up. Some of them are getting through the grass faster than I am, or, like, have bigger clearance and are able to ride through some of it that I can't. And, like, all this work that I've done is going down the tube. Like, and so mentally I'm exhausted. I'm tired. My legs aren't putting out power. Like, after I get through the mud, I don't know if more mud's coming. So mentally there, I'm like, I don't know that I can do this again. Like my legs were not putting on the amount of power. And I think mentally that was the hardest point, because as cyclists that, at a higher level, we're used to generally chipping off about 20 miles for every hour. Like, for every hour we ride, about 20 miles we're getting through. And in that race, at that point, I was doing maybe 15 miles an hour. And so the miles, I still had 120 miles at that point, 100 miles left. And I was like, this is going to take forever. Like,
doing the math in your head, you're like,
yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, the mud in that area of the country, when wet, basically turns to peanut butter.
Yes.
And it will clog up. Even the widest tire clearance will clog up in between the frame and into your brakes, drivetrain, and it will destroy a drivetrain. If you could even ride through it, it would destroy your drivetrain, and your race would be over anyways.
Yeah.
So for the most part, your best option is to hike through it.
Yeah, and that was an hour and 5 minutes worth of hiking my bike. And the bike was super heavy because it was just coated in mud. And like I said, I'd seen guys ride off, past me, and that's where I was having some second guesses of why did I do this.
Once so that hour, he covered 2.7 miles. And that's
not bad.
And that was 200.
That's power hiking, man.
That's 250 miles into a race.
Yeah.
16 and a half hours was when that all happened. 16 and a half hours in.
Once you got out of the mud, even though not knowing that there was more coming, did you have any way to like clean the bike off, spray it, or were you just like picking it off with your hands?
I mean, I had like a park cleaning bike tool that I brought with me to help scrape that mud off, and I just scraped as much off as I could. I tried to keep spinning that wheel. I mean, because it was the point that like my back wheel would not turn over. Like, putting all my effort into my pedals with my hand, I could not get it to spin. There was that much mud caked. And if anybody saw the photos from Lighting Speed Shop that they had posted, the pictures of my bike, or look at my Instagram, I'm surprised that my bike even shifted. Like, credit to SRAM Force. I'd put that on the bike, and I was a little hesitant of putting electronic shifting on there, but like, that thing shifted down. It took it a second. Like, it had to work for it. But no, I mean, wasn't able to clean it off other than just scraping as much mud as I could off. And then I started riding again, and it eventually, scraped through enough that I was able to create enough for the tire to spin and the drivetrain to shift back and forth. And yeah.
It weighed 80 pounds more, but
yeah.
So at what point in the race did you were like, okay, I got this. Like, this is, there's all like any any ultra event, whether it be Ironman or running 100 miles or doing something like this, you're always going to go through these huge waves of emotion in the race. And half the time you're like, why the hell am I doing this? Am I even going to finish? Is something going to happen? What's coming next? At what point we're like, oh yeah, we're good here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, right after that was my lowest point. And then I would say once I got to like mile 260, 270, somewhere in there, that's when my mentality shifted of don't look at it as getting to mile 350. Like get to mile 300, which has another story behind it, but get to mile 300 where the next aid station is, that gas station, and then you get a break. And then you only have 50 miles left. So don't look at like, even though these miles are just creeping by 1 mile at a time when you wish it was going faster, get to mile 300, you'll get your break. And then it's 50 miles more. And the sun was starting to come out of that, like actually break through the clouds at that point. So that was mentally something that finally, and part of it too, was I had so many people supporting me, and I'll go into more into that at some point, but the number of people that were texting me and back here that I knew cared about me and were so excited for me, I couldn't let people down. Like that was mentally, that was part of it too. Like, cause I thought about what excuse do I have to be done? Like I was,
he did bring a pocket knife to slice those tires if needed.
Yeah. Mentally, like that was when I was in that lowest point, I was really thinking like, do I have a legitimate excuse to not do this race anymore? Like it was low. But when I got to that point, like I said, the sun was coming out, I got there. And then the final boost was we rejoined the course with the 100s and 200s with like 30 miles to go, and I had just finished the last like real what I felt like was the real technical. I knew they weren't going to throw any super technical stuff to finish out that race for the 100s and 200s, so I knew I was through the Jeep track stuff, which was very challenging, and we probably had 50 miles. That was the hardest part of the race, was like how much more technical it was than I thought it was going to be. I felt more like rule of 3 at times than just gravel racing. But when I got to see people for like first time in like hours and hours and hours, and the sun was out, and what was also cool was they were excited to see me, like because the 200s hadn't rolled through yet, so these are all 100s that like are on the slower end of that race, and I mean, I clearly looked like I'd been doing the 350, and they could see my race tag and stuff.
He's looking like Forrest Gump at the end of that third trip across the U.S.
I looked a little bit dirtier than the rest of them. And that was pretty fun because they were all super excited. I mean, I was passing all of them. And my power had kind of come back a little bit at that point. Like my body had rebounded enough and I think it was just, I knew I was close.
The energy, yeah.
Yeah. And so having that excitement, at one point towards the end, there was this kid who, like high schooler, who was super excited to ride with me. And he actually started doing polls with me and was like, wanted to help me get in. And like, I knew I was close at that point. So that was the uplifting moment of like, all right, I'm here. Like, and I have people to ride with, like all that.
And this is where David was testing his ability to perform with no fuel. So all of the non-hydration he's done before, it came into use here late in the race.
So where did the hydration and nutrition end, David?
Yeah. So my plan going into this, I had allotted basically 3 stops. One at mile 125, a gas station there, another gas station at 216, and then the final one was 300. And there was some other water stops that if it was going to be super hot, I knew I could stop at, but those are the 3 that I was planning on, because I felt like if I can avoid those earlier gas stations where other people are stopping, that's a competitive advantage I have as well, too, with the way that I can not need as much fuel. I can, with the hydration pack I had, the food I had on the bike, I knew I could get to 125. And I actually did jump quite a few spots by skipping that first gas station at mile 80. So 216 was the last stop I had. And then 300 was the next. 2 days before the race, they rerouted the stop at 300 because of a parade that was going through the town that we were supposed to be going through. But they said, hey, we're going to stock like our own aid station all up. We'll have you taken care of. I misunderstood that and took that as they were rerouting us to a different part of the town. Same basically location around 300. So I got to mile 295 and I was crossing this main road and I saw this, what looked like a little water station off to the side, which those had been set up throughout the course. Like there was some people who were just, locals that had set up water stations, whatever. And so I saw that. I saw 2 guys that had stopped and I was like, well, I'm not stopping there because I'm going to I have 5 more miles, like I'll stop at an actual gas station or, aid station and do that. And so I kept riding, and I get to the town, and all of a sudden it takes us away from the town. And I was like, oh no, that was the aid station that they created. So I skipped the aid station at 295. Yeah, 295. So my last stop for water and food was at 216, and then I didn't stop again until 350. And I had water and Gatorade. Thankfully, there was an angel on the side of the road, this postal worker that was handing out water, and so and that was before I knew I'd missed the stop. But I grabbed that, drank that whole bottle of water. But I ran out of Gatorade and water with 15 miles to go. And this was when the sun was actually starting to come out, because it had been pretty cool at that point. The race started at like 70 degrees, 74, and it got down to as low as 60. So again, very much suited my style of racing, of not needing as much water versus it being 90 and sunny for the, where I had to go through a lot more. So I had been running on a lot less, but that was the first moment where it got hot. Like it was 80 plus at that point. The sun was beating down, and I did get very nervous because as much as I don't drink as much as others and stuff like that, like I didn't know how much I had. And every time I took a drink out of my hydration, I couldn't feel how much I had left. So every time I took a drink out of my hydration pack, I was just praying that water would come out.
Waiting for bubbles.
Yeah. And I made it to, like I said, mile 15 was where it finally ran out. And at that point I knew I could make 15 miles, even though I was dry mouthed and, getting thirsty. And when I crossed that finish line, the first thing I asked for was just water. Just give me water.
Give me it all.
And you see in those pictures, I'm holding 2 bottles at one point. But yeah, so that was a little error. But because of that, I passed 16th and 17th. And that's how I got 15th. So, it benefited me.
Sometimes being a camel pays off.
Yeah, exactly.
So you rolled in 15th, like your major support crew's all right there. Like, how cool was the finish line vibe?
It was super special. Like, to have, like, going into this, like, if some people that know me, they know how crazy my work schedule can be at times, and how it doesn't lend itself real well to races because I don't know when I'm going to have events until the last minute. This was a race that had, my friend Will had suggested for a while, but like it was generally falls right in the playoffs. So I don't know if, I'm going to be able to do it. This was the first time that, because of us not making the playoffs and the Grizzlies not making the playoffs, and also my not supposed to have concerts around that time because we were shutting down for a little bit for construction, I was like, all right, I can do this. So again, that was a big check off. And then the training I'd been having for the past couple of years, I've been having some back issues, and some hip issues and stuff. And even though I, still was able to do those longer rides, I'd been doing them with some, stopping at gas stations from here to there and stuff like that. So like I hadn't gone this long just fully on my own. So there was a bit of nervousness going into it of, can my body actually do this? And so to have all that come together, my schedule play out the way I needed it to, the training come together, the race come together with, no mechanicals, it didn't rain where it was even more mud. I mean, the year before they had to walk through like 10 miles of mud. It was way worse. So there was that fear, and then, even to the point of like, literally a mile before the race ended, the 16th and 17th that I thought I had dropped way before, all of a sudden rode up right to me, and I had to flip from being excited to be done mode to, I need to race mode. And like I was able to beat them on this little kicker that goes into town. So like all these things came together to just be like, just so like emotional, like at the end of it, like just like it all came together to be almost perfect.
Coming into the finish, 16th and 17th come right up on your 6.
Yeah.
And you put in a little dig up a kicker, and they said, no thanks.
Yeah. They didn't have it for that last little bit, which, again, has been part of the training, is being able to maintain that power as long as possible. And I was able to do that. And then, rolling in down that straightaway, hundreds of people excited. I mean, there was so many people had just cheered on the 200 men that had come through. They were waiting for the women. So like it was a huge group of people at those finish lines. So that was exciting to get cheered on by everybody. And then to roll up and to see, you know, my friends, the people I care about that had been literally waiting by that start finish line for the best spot, like for hours. I couldn't thank them enough for the people that came out. Will, Shelby, my wife, Heather, Jamie, Lee, and Todd. And I had some teammates there. Like it was just so special. Like after that effort to finally come across that finish line and be done. You know, it was pretty special that it all came together that way. And then to be cared about the way that I had been. I mean, I received hundreds of text messages before, during, and after. When I got off that bike and finally opened my phone up, I had 150 missed messages. And that was just messages that I had seen from the moment I started that race that I hadn't opened until the end. Like that wasn't all the ones that I'd received before. And that wasn't the hundreds that I received afterwards, you know, people telling me that they had been following me. And like, you know, I received, like I said, hundreds of messages throughout the night, like 2, 3, 4 a.m. of my friends and teammates and family that, you know, people here in Memphis that were just saying, hey, I see you, like, keep going, you know, like, like they were following my tracking. We all had trackers on us so they could see how everybody was doing and telling me what position I was in. And that's what kept me going. And it was the reason that I wanted to do this race. I mean, I had this community in Memphis here supporting me. I still have people coming up that I don't know that will come up to me like, hey, I was tracking you in that race. And I was like, thank you. I don't know who you are, but I really appreciate it, you know, and to have that many people. And that's what makes our Memphis community so special. You know, the people here that generally care about each other, not just cycling, but, you know, runners, you know, everybody in the athletic community here is so cool. And just really made the event that much more special, knowing that so many people were, you know, cared about me and were invested in how I was doing and, you know, were inspired by me doing that race, was really cool.
And I think it's a testament to, you know, that you always say, like, when you set a goal, it's super important to tell other people about it. Like once you make a commitment to do something, it's a lot harder to back out once other people know about it. And David even, you know, he mentioned it, you know, like thinking of ways like what would be a good justification to quit right now, but knowing there was so many people who were, you know, paying attention to it and interested in how he was going to do and had confidence in you. Yeah. Like when other people have confidence in you, that lifts your confidence levels as well.
I would say that the amount of regret that you'd be holding today, if you got back to the finish line and saw those 150 messages.
Well,
good on you.
Can someone take me back there?
Yeah.
So last thing we want to talk about real quick is the bike, because the equipment choices on something like this make a massive difference. It's a make or break a lot of the times.
Yeah.
So just kind of break down the bike. Obviously, tire choice is huge in gravel, gearing, and any other like major things that you feel like were massively important to that setup.
Yeah. So that was a big part of it. I mean, going into this race, this race could have any outcome. It doesn't, like, I could have done all this training and then, like other people on the course, I like could have had terrible mechanical issues that that could have ruined my day. So I knew that part of this race had to be not, okay, the goal is to get a certain finish, because if I don't get that, then it's like, I don't want to feel like my whole race is ruined. So like part of it was going into it thinking, let me have fun building the bike with my friend Will, who owns Lighting Speed Shop. And then also the training, I wanted to work with Funston because he's my friend and I wanted to be able to take part in that with him. And then, you know, getting other people involved at times as well. But that was kind of the goal, because I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened with this race, it was still fun, the adventure going into it.
The journey to get there is bigger than the result. Correct.
So that was a goal. So specifically on the bike side, I had a Look 765 gravel bike that I've had for a couple of years. And my goal, one of the big things I wanted to do was to upgrade it to electronic shifting. So I went with SRAM Force access on that. by a weird happenstance, I ended up upgrading the frame a couple weeks into this because the original frame cracked and Look warrantied it. So I got the nicer gravel frame out of it, their RS model, which was awesome. Just a little bit nicer carbon. So the bike I had the reserve wheels on it, the deep 50 or 60, 53 wheels on there. Which were set up tubeless. We went, Gravel King SKs, the Panaracer Gravel King SKs, not the plus version, but just the SKs. Those are brand new. A friend gifted me those.
What was the size on those?
43s. We went 43s. That was specific because we knew how chunky the stuff was during this race. We knew clearance could be a little bit of an issue, but again, my thought was that even if I went to like 38s, I'm not going to pedal through this peanut butter mud. Like it wasn't like going a little bit lower. So I wanted the confidence of better puncture resistance, lower pressure I could run, and just that wider tire for getting through all that chunky stuff. So that was the tire we went with, which worked out perfectly. I didn't have any issues. I mean, with a race like that, I would recommend getting new tires before you do something like that. So that was awesome. No flats or anything like that. Again, the SRAM Force Access we went with. I went with profile design aero bars on there. I wanted an option to just give my hands a relief instead of grabbing the bars on the hoods or in the drops, being able to put my arms down and get in that aero position and just get pressure off of my palms. And if there was enough flat sections, just to be able to be in that aero position for a while. We put the blips on the top of those so I could shift from there. So we had the SRAM blips there so I could shift my drivetrain. So that was really nice.
Which paid off when there was the mini mechanical.
We had that mechanical because I was able to shift with that blip.
What was the gearing on it?
I don't know, unfortunately.
Was it a 1x or
2x?
2x.
2x. Okay. It was 2x. And I'm bad with stuff like that. I just go with what
Will real quick.
Yeah, I just go with what Will gives me.
We'll just say 60-46.
Yeah.
As far as like packing and hydrate, like getting all that stuff on the bike is a huge problem.
Yeah, that was definitely a concern. I went with the Apidura top tube bag that had like the magnetic closure, which was super helpful. I put my battery packs and some like tire plugs and stuff in there. I had an Apidura frame bag where I put all my food, my lights. I had even a vest in there in case it got too cold, stuff like that. And then I went with the Usway 2-liter race hydration pack, so it didn't really have any storage on it, but I wrapped a third tire or a spare tire replacement on the back just in case I had, a terrible sidewall tear or something. I could actually still keep racing, and that fit pretty well in the back, wrapped around there. I taped it up real clean and then like wrapped it around the side straps. And so I had the 2 liters of water, and then I had 2 bottles on the frame. I had a Silka hand pump attached to the frame. And then I had I had 2 lights with me that I used.
Yeah. What lights did you go with?
One was I'm forgetting the brand name, but there's one I've had for a long time, and then I bought the new ones that Ladding offers as well, that had like the little dial on the side and stuff, that those ones can charge while they're running. So I ran with that pretty much all night long at a lower power. On the battery pack. And then when I made that stop at 216, I swapped over to my other one just at full brightness. But it was nice being able to run at lower power. And then when I got through technical sections, be able to turn it up to be able to see everything even better. Worked well.
Nice. Good. So at the end of the race, there was a video where you said, I'm probably never going to do this again. Now that the PTSD has worn off, what's next?
Yeah. it's, you know, the past couple weeks has just been recovering. I don't think I would ever do that specific race again. It was extremely technical. I mean, I'm very happy I did it. It was, you know, once in a lifetime thing. But man, that threw everything it possibly could at you. But as long as my body keeps recovering the way I want it to, I figured I have the fitness still, and went through all that training, and I have the time. I think we're targeting Gravel Worlds 300 in August, end of August. Same thing. It starts at 5 o'clock on Friday, and it goes into the next day. But that is the plan right now.
Awesome.
We had that little chat the other day.
That's
It's
race amnesia at its finest.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. The pain's kind of worn off, and I already did all this training.
Yeah.
What do you think, Bryant? I was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, Dave, man, we appreciate you coming in, giving your time, and talking about this awesome event. We appreciate everyone else hanging out, listening, watching. Until next time, adios.
Peace.
See ya.